question. So again, yeah, we're very excited to be starting this new project. And this is thanks to the Tasmanian government, who are providing support via the Agricultural Development Fund. And a key reason for our grant success is the strong support for the project by Wine Tasmania, because Botrytis management is a priority in their RD&E strategy. Other collaborators include New Farm, Australian Wine Research Institute, and other providers who might come on board during the project. But our key collaborators will be the producers who participate in this project, and indeed you will be vital to the project's success. And how you might get involved is the focus of the project today. Well, obviously, botrytis is still a major issue for many, and we know some years are worse than others. And in some blocks in Tasmania, it is a constant feature. There are still gaps in our knowledge. For example, how well do these biological products work? There is also an opportunity to understand what more can be done in the vineyard to better manage botrytis. This project is about helping producers decide what practices are going to suit a particular site and in relation to your production goals and the end use of those grapes. What we might tolerate in Riesling grapes for table wine might be very different for grapes used for sparkling wine, for example. We already know that botrytis management is not one size fits all. Some of you have heard me give talks about botrytis, and I tend to take the view that our fungicide sprays should be seen as an additional measure to other practices, especially canopy management and other cultural practices. Yet at some sites, it can make sense to do a full-on spray program in those years where we are trying to keep one step ahead of the weather. So this project is about exposing people to the tools in the toolbox and then trying things to see what's going to work at any given site or in any given season. So the objectives of the project are to help you do trials that produce useful information relevant to any given site. I'm going to talk about the how shortly, but the first principle is that it has to be easy and manageable. And the second objective is to share project results broadly, including what's worked and what it has meant for the participating wine businesses. We're about to employ a project coordinator who will help, and they'll be the glue to bring all the pieces together and help with that sharing amongst people as those results come through. So an overarching outcome is that producers and or service providers who participate in the project have developed the means to evaluate botrytis management practices adapted to one or more sites. Another outcome, of course, is that any change leads to greater profitability and or reduced costs for the business. Or it might just be easier. It's just you change and it's just easy to get your job done. So we have 2 growing seasons in which to do this work collaboratively. Ideally, we would like to involve at least 10 trial collaborators across the state and from a diversity of wine businesses and across different scales and production goals. And there may be some vineyards who may want to do more than one trial. So what's different about this project is that it's not about TIA researchers coming onto your vineyard to do a trial and then stand up a field day to present the results. In this project, we're going to work together during the trial work, but in the simplest and easiest of ways. So we come to this work with the idea that people who try new things tend to take notice of their own self-generated evidence. And I'm wearing a sports watch, for example, and this is an example of the quantified self. And here you will be quantifying your own actions in the vineyard, but with help. And hopefully this will give a more objective and direct way of supporting your decisions. So how are we going to do these trials? Firstly, we're going to apply a trial method that we have already tested in previous research with at least 4 growers. It's a simple strip trial method that any grower should be able to implement using their own commercial equipment. The difference from the so-called demonstration trial is that we generate results that can be just as rigorous and informative as a researcher's replicated small plot trial. We know that producers experiment all the time, but they've told us that they often don't have confidence in the results from their own trials. So our method is an attempt to address some of those issues. Now, in this method, we are going to compare your current practice with a treatment or practice that you want to try. It can extend to trying 2 new things if we set it up properly, but of course that's more work. But if you want to, then we can help with the design on that one. The idea is to position a strip along rows likely to capture the maximum range of botrytis severity in that block, going from low to high. Now, there is a way of knowing how to position a strip trial, and we will cover that as we go along. However, if you have a lot of experience with a given block, you might already know which rows to choose for a trial. So this slide shows what the results can look like. It is actual trial data. I'm just not revealing what the treatments are because we did this work as social research and we can't reveal who and what. However, what I can tell you is that the current practice was their normal spray program, and the test treatment was the same spray program, but they added 1 more spray in the late season interval between veraison and harvest. And I believe it was one of the biological products. So the way that the spray was implemented, obviously as wide as whatever the sprayer is going down that strip. They also emptied the tank. They didn't want to just mix up one tank for that. They did end up emptying the tank by doing other rows, but we had the current practice beside the test spray program. And then what was done then, in this case, we selected every 5th vine going down the row, and we stopped at that vine and did the botrytis assessment. And then with that data, what we do is calculate what we call a moving window average, and that can be graphed. So in this graph, you can see a plot of the average botrytis severity. That's the percentage area of the bunch for each of those sample vines going down the row. And each of these points is the moving window average that we've calculated going down that row. And you can see clearly here that you can see that if there's a difference in the magnitude between the current practice and the test treatment. Now, going down the row, you can see that there is numerically a difference going down there, but at some sections of that row, there was no visible difference between the botrytis assessment in those rows. So the program, the test treatment did generally lower the botrytis severity. However, then it's up to the producer to decide, is that magnitude of that difference, is that going to be useful, and is that going to warrant either adopting a new program and or testing it again in other blocks or in subsequent seasons. And importantly, if you have selected the right rows to do the trial, then these results should also reflect the likely responses in other areas of the block, because you're capturing that variation that exists in the block. The trial itself also gives you an assessment of botrytis severity for that block, just simply by doing the assessment, and that can go in your records and can be used for post-season reviews and or to track how you're going from one season to the next. So that's kind of the simplest strip trial. These trials can get even more sophisticated if you want them to be and are willing and capable. I'm just showing a trial here that is probably the most technically sophisticated that you would get, where it was actually some research done. It wasn't actually done as a strip trial, but we're actually able to derive a strip trial from it. Some research done in South Australia. And there were 3, this wasn't a botrytis trial, but it just shows how it can be applied anywhere. There were 3 mid-row management treatments. I'm just trying to think. They were different between the row growth. So I think CL was a cereal or legume alternating in the mid-rows. There was ryegrass. RC was ryegrass supplemented by compost, and RM was ryegrass supplemented by mulch. But what happens here, they did actually happen to have a yield monitor to get the yield. The PCD is the plant cell density. So you can see this black line going down the trial. You can see how that vigor, as indicated by the plant cell density or the imagery, was changing. And then you can see the effect of the different treatments. And you can see that mostly the CL treatment was giving a higher yield, where you've got a PCD of about 1.4% or less than the other treatments. But once that PCD or that vigor was getting higher, you can see that the three treatments there was a different response, where you had different spatial variation going in that block. So this just gives you an indication of that's a more technical trial, but obviously you need more equipment and things to actually do this sort of trial. But so the type of trial can vary from the simplest. We can adapt the complexity of that trial to what people have and what people can do. However, if we do want to do yield, though, we don't have necessarily any yield monitors. I think there might be 1 or 2 yield monitors in the state, but we might be doing more simple things, just like assessing botrytis severity. So far I've talked about the trial method, and the next part of the presentation is really about what's involved in being a trial collaborator, and the likely benefits of that. But I'll just stop sharing and look so I can see you again. That's just an opportunity to get, if you've got any impressions of that, ask questions now, save it for later. But I'll just stop in case you just want to digest that for a little bit before we go on to the next.
Kathy, how do you determine botrytis severity?
Yeah, so when we stop at the sample vine, what we'll do is we might decide how many bunches we're going to select on that vine. Can't remember now. We might select 5 or 10. Can't remember how many we did now, but we'll try and remember. And it's simply you can use a standard area diagram. You can just have a picture there of, and you just eyeball it and say, oh, I think it's about 10%, 90%. Yeah, it's still not objective measures, but we've found that just by using a standard key, you can still, so you assess the percentage across the 10 bunches and you'll get an average. So you'll get an average for that vine. And then you can start doing the average down that.
Fine, thanks.
And Kathy, you showed lots of different potential botrytis controls. Are you going to direct the participant in what sort of things to do? You did say that it was up to them, but it could be a cultural practice, or it could be a biological spray, or it could be an 80% Cap 4 spray, or how are they going to decide what to do?
That's a really good question, Marcel, because I'd imagine some will need some guidance around that. That would be normal. Yep. Unless they've got a definite idea of, I've always wondered about, would this work? So what we'll do, and I'll talk about this a bit later, but when we come together in our face-to-face, we're going to be running an activity, a little group meeting in different parts of the state, and we'll come together all one-on-one. And what we're going to do is go through a botrytis checklist, and we'll try and identify for each of those sites, what's the critical things going on at that site, and do a bit of a triage. What happened last year? What are some of the critical control points? What might give the best bang for buck at that site? There could be some things that we come up with and say, well, that's not actually trialable. If someone's using a spray rig, for example, that it's just, well, we just need to improve the spray coverage or do something there. That's not actually trialable, really. Because you should just be fixing that. That's a basic that just needs to be fixed. But even so, we might just change. And the trick there will be just choosing one thing to change at a time. You can, if people want to totally change a spray program, you can still compare one spray program versus another spray program. But if you're changing more than one thing in that spray program, what you're doing is comparing the spray programs, not the one little change that you made to the program. So they're the sort of conversations that we'll have. And it will depend on what people, some are very focused on their fungicide program. Others are wanting to, so if there's more of a focus, we might say, well, what objective are we trying to get here with your canopy management? And this is where we can have that broader conversation around good viticultural practice, for example, because we also believe if you get some of that viticulture rights, that will also help with your botrytis management as well. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to have broader conversation. And yeah, absolutely. And the other good thing is if we come together as a group, people can bounce off each other and oh, I hadn't thought about that. And they might say, well, we do this over here and that works for us, and say, oh yeah, I'd like to try that. So that might be something that happens as well, but I can't wait to find out.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Okay, well, anything else before I'll do the rest, and that might prompt some more questions there. Here I have to share the screen again. That's where we are. Okay, hopefully you've got the screen there again. All right, so okay, so what will it involve in being a collaborator? Well, as I said, we'll be hosting a pre-season meeting in your region. I'll talk about that a bit where later. And that'll be to help people select their test treatments. And then we'll meet after the growing season to view and discuss everyone's results, at least the things that people are willing to share. We hope there are obviously some things that there might be some things that are commercial in confidence, but people will know what they're willing to share. We hope that we create a safe space for people to be open about their trials and any challenges in getting it done. Sometimes things get in the way, and we won't be judging anyone if things don't go to plan. In fact, we want to know about any constraints or barriers to doing this work. You'll also get to liaise with the project team during the trial. We'll serve as a help desk, and we will provide assistance on an as-needs basis. So an example of that might be if when it comes to that botrytis assessment, we might just come and walk down that row with you. We think it'd be a good idea if you've got the time to do that assessment, and then we can have a discussion about what are you seeing as you go down that row, and just have a broader discussion around that. So you will certainly be deciding what you can and you can't do, and we know how busy it can get in vineyards at certain times. You will receive reminders from us to record simple information about the trial, like spray dates or the date of a canopy manipulation. You'll also send us information and or we'll come begging for it, because we're hoping to bring some of those results in and collate them and put them in a format that we can share with you giving us permission to share it with the rest of the group. Depending on what people want, we could set up like an online forum or a discussion board to people to share thoughts or insights as we go along, or some sort of social media, but really I'm going to be guided by people as we go along. You will also be interviewed at least once by researchers from the university. These are social researchers, so don't be too scared of that. But they'll be there. They're going to do the evaluation of the project with them. I'm working with them at the moment to work out how we're going to evaluate this work, because what we want to learn is what works, what doesn't work, what do people value, and if people value this, then how can we do more of it after the project ends. So we'll be doing a lot of communication about the project. Some of you may be willing to talk about your experiences, for example, at a Wine Tasmania field day. And I haven't listed it here, but we are currently developing a collaborator agreement that we will discuss with you. This is an agreement. It's the sort of stuff that the university requires. It's fundamentally about protecting any background intellectual property. And that, your wine businesses might be bringing something to the project, but we need to recognise what that might be. I don't know what that would be at the moment, but it's just an agreement that states, recognition of anything background that's brought to the project, and what if we do happen to generate some new intellectual property. Again, I don't know what that would be, that we have a way of noting that and having discussions around that. But the intent of it, that's kind of the basic university stuff. But the intent of this is really around when you come on board as a collaborator, it's really about formalising our commitment to each other to do this work together. It's a statement about how we're going to interact with each other, and that, you know, we'll collaborate in good faith and that we'll respect the needs of each other's business interests. So it's a bit like a memorandum of understanding. And I've been involved in many collaborations over the years with different groups, and it's really important to manage expectations up front, while acknowledging that whatever you bring to this project, you can bring as little or as much as you like to this project. There's nothing saying you have to do things, but it's just talking about the way we interact with each other, so that we all know who's responsible for what, and just those expectations are quite clear at the start of the project, and we can adapt them as we go along, of course. So after today, we'll be hosting some small group meetings. These won't start until late September. Jessie's kindly going to host the first one up at St Matthias Vineyard in the Tamar Valley. That's organised for Thursday, the 28th of September. I think I might have yesterday sent out a placeholder for that. We'll send some more information about that one. I'm just holding off on a group meeting on the East Coast and the South at the moment. We just need to get a few more expressions of interest before we proceed with that. It may end up that we might go and visit producers one-on-one in the various locations, but we'll see what's going to be best there. But when you do come along, what we're going to be doing is we'll do a recap on the basics of Botrytis bunch rot. We'll help you develop your trial idea, and it's an opportunity to seek feedback from others. We'll use that Botrytis checklist to help you arrive at trial options suited to your operations. We will also discuss the conduct of trials, who is going to do what and why, and that might vary from one place to another, and it might be an ongoing conversation during the growing season. We can also have a discussion on how people want to communicate with each other, so that we can set up some tools to help with that. And again, if you can't attend those meetings, then we'll try and catch up with people individually, but we will really encourage attendance because you can often learn a lot from the other people who are present. I didn't show this one at the session yesterday, but look, what do I mean by Botrytis checklist? And really what it might just be, it's just that diagnostic thing. This is a very simplified dummy version, if you will, but really it's about us going through what's happening at different parts of the season, that, you know, what happened last year, what are some of the things going on at that site that might be quite unique. Is it unique at that site, or is it just that growing season? Or, you know, it's also making you think about the scenarios going forward, because it can be different things in different growing seasons. I won't go into that now. But that's just what we mean by checklist. The benefits of being a trial collaborator. Sounds like I'm doing a pitch here, and really the research is about finding out what are the benefits. But you get to decide what you try with our help, suggestions and a review. You get to see the results of your own trials and those of others. The results should directly support your decisions about what to do next with Botrytis. And I'll just put a caveat here, because some trials will fail, and often the failure is due to extreme weather. But even if we have drought, for example, we can still learn what we didn't need to do in those conditions, perhaps, and we can have a bit more confidence around that. And even if a trial fails, you know, again, it's an opportunity to learn something, to develop your skills, especially through those group activities. And I think being a collaborator might come in handy. Also thinking about your future job roles. I know Wine Tasmania have been running some leadership programs around the state. Paul's been, and Shirley have been asking people to step up and do things, and, you know, be a bit more community minded with the sector. So this is also a way, if you do this work, not only it might help your company's bottom line, but it can also, you know, you can demonstrate some leadership here too by being a trial collaborator, if that's important to you. Okay, so that's that bit. I'm just again going to stop there, and I've got just a few more slides to finish off, and Does that raise any more questions? Maybe, Marcel, that answered some of that question that you asked before as well.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. So just personally, are you looking as a researcher to see how this process works, or the process and also what worked best in the vineyard, or is it a bit of both?
Yeah. It's definitely a bit of both. So I say process and outcomes. Obviously, we're being funded for this work to improve botrytis management. So absolutely, we want to know, if we do things, is it going to make a difference? Yesterday, interestingly, it was raised, you know, how might this inform, I'm just trying to think of the words, how might this form some more standardised protocols for botrytis management in Tasmania? You know, do we get any, are there some common learnings that, you know, might feed into a more general, you know, botrytis management that's really specific to Tasmanian conditions? So we might learn stuff that we can pull together. We're open to that. For the individual trials, we've got to think clearly about what we are assessing. We can just assess botrytis severity and get a measure of that. But we're also thinking what else. We'll also be guided by producers about how do you actually evaluate a botrytis trial. Do we also need to look at the fruit? If people are dropping fruit on the ground, how much fruit is being dropped? What crop loss does that represent? If we extrapolated that, could that give us a feel for what we're actually losing at sites? Through the discussions, it might be, you know, the winemaker might come on side and say, well, if we get that pretty graph, it might trigger some conversations around, well, what are we actually going to tolerate for winemaking? And then there might be discussions around that might, you know, what are our thresholds? What are people basing those thresholds on? So I just think it might trigger a few more things. So definitely the outcomes of that. But evaluating outcomes, the process really is about evaluating this as a learning tool, but also how do we do it in practice? Like this project won't be here. We do it for 2 years and we leave. What happens after that? What would be the things that would make this sustainable? You know, are there services that could be offered? Who would do that? Or how much are people willing to do themselves? What help do they need? All that sort of thing. So that's the research, I guess, we're doing, as well as capturing how well we deal with our botrytis management.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of, definitely, and a lot of interest in what you learn in this process that can then be extended across other, you know, not just within Tasmania, but for other pest diseases in other regions, how we collect information about what growers are doing and what works. That's good.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Marcel. All right, so I'll go along with it. There's just a few more slides, really, just to wrap up, and then we'll stop. Share screen again. I'm getting good at this now, she says. Okay, so I just want to highlight that we have done a lot of research behind this trial methodology, even though it's fundamentally, for a researcher, it looks like the simplest things. And when I talk to researchers about this, they just can't cope with the fact that it looks very simple. But a lot of this has been through the recent PhD work of Summer Song, and she was looking at both the case studies, grower case studies, and looking at this simple strip trial methodology. Where do we position a strip? So there is some basis around this. So this project is really about scaling out the approach and seeing how it is valued by those who want answers to their botrytis problems. So during our previous research, we asked participating growers what they thought, and one of the trials was about testing a biological product. And after the trial, the grower believed that further testing of the biologicals was needed. He was initially concerned about the amount of time and effort needed to do the trial, but these fears were allayed during the process. He said, we know we have a process that we can implement without too many dramas in the field, that staff can go and apply, as an example, without major dramas. And let me tell you, there can be dramas. He also said that he would be keen to try the process again. He said he would be keen to do more of it if it was possible. not necessarily just on this topic, but on any other topic that comes up that benefits both parties. And of course, he was talking about his business and the researchers who were involved with that. And it could be researchers in this, or it could be a suitably qualified service provider in future. The trial also involved a reseller who was supplying the biological product. He was also doing trials at this site, but using his particular method. And by involving him, it certainly raised his awareness of the limitations of his method, where he was just, it was more a demonstration trial where he was just getting an average for the whole row. And he said, I already think that I need to talk to my colleague about incorporating this moving box assessment in a way that she assesses her trials as a way to make it more weighty. He was also interested in how such a trial could also boost his credibility, because he's giving advice, and he felt that he needed some conclusive results to back any advice that he was giving. So for those who would like to express interest, and thank you to those of you here who already have, but just a reminder that people can go directly to the website and complete the online form. I think in the chat box here of this, I might have posted the link to the website. It's also in the calendar invite. Thank you to those, again, if you've done this already. Otherwise, people can email me to arrange a time to call, and we just fill it in together. So I'd really encourage you, if you know other producers who you think might like to do this, by all means, they can just email me directly. Because we know sometimes navigating that online form is not the easiest thing. Happy to help people fill that in. As a project leader, just so that you know, I am working with a project industry reference group. Jesse's here today. It also includes Paul Smart and Ben Peach from Brown Family Wines. And that group is very important to me to, if we have any issues, they're checking our plans as we go through. If any issues arise, then I will certainly be referring to them for advice. So last slide. We think you are best placed to drive the type of trial that will answer your questions. We certainly don't expect people to do this on their own. I'm here to give some expertise, but there is also a whole lot of practical wisdom out there, including one in the room today. At least I've always believed that a problem shared is a problem halved. This is a university research project, but what we call this action research, it's about learning and doing at the same time. So we hope to learn what is valued or not about the approach, what motivates people, what doesn't, who needs to be involved, what role should they play, what capabilities are needed to do this type of work, and if it is valued, how can we do more of what people value after the project finishes. So thank you for your attention. I'll stop there. And now I shall stop the recording